wondering. To the Sesame Colloquium, we're very excited to have an excellent and varied turnout. We have people from the Lawrence Hall of Science and Computer Science here today, which is great. I'm delighted to introduce Libby Gerard, who I've worked with for quite a long time. I first met Libby when she joined the Technology Enhanced Learning and Science Center as a graduate student at Mills, and she got her PhD at Mills, where she worked on principal leadership and actually published her dissertation in the Journal of School Leadership. But prior to coming to graduate school, I think one of the factors that made her exciting to us and us exciting to her is that her first job was as a sort of kindergarten teacher in Italy at a Reggio Emilio-inspired school, which is a school that is very interested in true inquiry, where students really inquire from the ground up or from the beginning of their school careers. And she had the exciting responsibility of designing real inquiry as well as curriculum for this program. And it was sort of an English immersion program, except, of course, no one spoke English. So it was a really very exciting opportunity to be challenged to think about inquiry. And her insights drawn from that program and from that philosophy, the Reggio Emilia philosophy, were very helpful in her PhD work. Since then, she's been expanding on her school leadership work to think particularly about professional development and how technology can be included in professional development. She published a paper on postdoc work in the Journal of Research in Science Teaching, and she subsequently did a review of all the literature on technology enhanced professional development and published that in a review of educational research. And as you may be aware, she just published 2 papers in Science. So she's has an excellent publication record and some really interesting work that she's going to talk about today. I'd like to welcome Libby Gerard.
Hi. So I know many of you. I'm Libby, as Marcia said. I'm a National Science Foundation funded research scientist in the School of Ed. And Marcia mentioned a little bit about myself, a little bit more. I work with the Technology Enhanced Learning and Science Center, which, as you can see in this picture here, is made up of a community of researchers, technologists, and teachers who are developing and testing innovative technologies for science learning. And prior to becoming a researcher, I worked as a production assistant for a now-failed news show at the CNN Center in Atlanta, and was a teacher in both a Reggio Emilia-inspired preschool, which that's our house in Italy, and at an elementary school in Oakland. And this combination of experiences gave me an interest in really how technology can capture one's thinking, a moment of time of thinking, and prompt reflection on how you might refine that thinking. And that leads in a circuitous way, but connected to what I'm going to talk about today, which is 2 classroom studies that investigate the design of automated guidance for students writing within an inquiry unit, and looking at how that guiding for writing influences their learning. So first, to start off, why is designing guidance for inquiry hard? Let's look at a question. This is called Green Roof. And this unit is embedded in the middle of a week-long inquiry project on photosynthesis, where students are looking at visualizations of energy transformation inside of plants and inside of the earth. So you can see they start out looking at where the energy is coming from. They look inside of the chloroplast, also what happens to energy when it hits the earth, and then look at where energy is stored. And this question comes in about day 5. So with the person next to you, just take a couple minutes to pretend you're a 7th grader and think about what idea you might say to this question here.
I've never seen that.
All right, let's hear, you can just yell out a couple of your ideas. Let me see if you sound, know what a 7th grader thinks. All right, how about in the back? Tell me what you thought. Anybody got Adela, what do you guys think? Some therapists, I guess.
We were thinking about the first question, like it seems like it's logical that a 7th grader would think about the sun providing energy. But then we got stuck in the second question, how does energy move or transfer place to place? And then we were thinking like, well, I guess what's the prior knowledge that the 7th grader has in order to be able to answer that question? Is he already exposed to photosynthesis or not?
Okay, any other ideas? What a 7th grader might say? You want to give me a couple more? Yeah, back there?
So the sun comes up the plants, and the plants grow food, and then we eat the food.
Oh, yeah.
So the food is energy.
Yeah, okay, that's a good one. Any more? Okay, well, the kids have a variety of creative ideas about this. So for instance, they'll say things like, well, when they grow, this gives the house shade, and the house then can save money on electricity. Or something like energy comes from pre-existing energy that transforms, it's stored in molecules, and energy explodes and the chemicals inside change. Or something like this, where they have a magic house that the sun's energy goes to the plants absorb the energy, it goes to the walls to be stored, and then is transformed when it goes down the walls. Or the energy is converted to heat, which then means they don't have to use a heater any longer in their house. The energy is attracted to the roof. Plants grow easier because they're closer to the sun, so there's less light. They grow on the roof easier because they're more close to the light energy. And then a very common one is this idea that the energy is stored in the plants like solar panels, which then can give energy to the house to charge things like the refrigerator. So these are just some of the ideas that students generate as they're going through a unit like this. And they're trying, as you can see, to integrate new ideas that they're gathering from these visualizations about the energy transformation with ideas that they've gained from their everyday experiences and trying to make connections among them, which is good. But you can see they need further guidance to help sort out these ideas and integrate them into a more accurate and coherent view. So how do you guide them without just giving them the right answer? The goal of the guidance is knowledge integration. So this suggests that guiding inquiry should help elicit students' ideas, just as we saw in the green roof question, help students to explore additional, more normative ideas, which may be from using visualizations or experiments, and then support students in distinguishing these ideas using evidence and organizing them into a more coherent and integrated understanding. And across contexts, a focus on knowledge integration instruction helps students to reflect upon and refine their understanding. But guiding students to integrate ideas during inquiry is hard. The challenge is articulated very well by a couple of teachers. So a teacher says, I have a hard time knowing what feedback to give the students without just giving them the answer. Where everyone is asking for something and I can't get to them. So you can imagine in most middle school classrooms there's 30 to 40 students, and with this variety of different ideas, it's quite challenging. So this problem is what motivates the research design for the first classroom study I'd like to talk to you about. How does automated knowledge integration guidance support learning relative to typical guidance? So first I wanted to test the knowledge integration approach relative to what students would receive otherwise in class. Does it add value? Can it support the teachers? So I compared the knowledge integration to what I call simulated teacher guidance, which is illustrative of the guidance that was given by experienced teachers. If the automated guidance can do as well as the teacher, this could free the teacher to circle the classroom to work with students. Secondly, I wanted to understand more generally how the guidance influences learning. What happens when a student revises their writing in science, and what should happen when they're revising their writing to improve knowledge integration. The literature supports the value over and over again of guidance. But a large body of this work focuses on the teacher professional development is important to help teachers design guidance to respond to this very category of ideas. Often that professional development involves analyzing hundreds of student responses to figure out what types of different ideas they have and how to craft guidance. So this takes lots of time, which leads to the potential advantage of the automated guidance. The advantage of the automated guidance is that it analyzes 1,000 or more responses to design the guidance, and teachers would not have the chance to see that big a variety of responses until the third year of teaching that unit at least. So in this study, I used C-Rater ML, which is a natural language processing tool developed by the Educational Testing Service to interpret students' essays. And the scoring model is based on 1,000 human-scored essays to the same question. So the computer can instantaneously assign a score. The accuracy has to be above a cap of 0.75, and then assign the guidance based on the score. And then we can embed that guidance into the week-long inquiry unit. So the guidance, after it's assigned on the score, is designed so that it can promote knowledge integration as the students are in the midst of this unit. So what does that look like? So this means that every level of the guidance is designed to move the student up one level in this 5-point rubric. And each level of the guidance follows a similar pattern in that it's designed to elicit students' ideas so that it makes an observation about their initial response to connect to what they're thinking. Then it asks a question about a key missing or non-normative idea that was in their response. Then guides the student to some evidence within the unit to which they can contrast their ideas. And then prompts the student to use the evidence that they've gathered to refine their view. And this comes at about day 5, as you can see, of the photosynthesis unit. So what does this actually look like from a student's perspective? I'm just going to play this video. So you can see this. So the student, you can see, is like about halfway through the unit, gets to the question, I'll read it for you. It writes, the energy coming from the sun's light energy going into the plant, and the energy moves from the plant to the cords in the house. The student goes down and hits check answer. It asks them if this is their best work. They're about to get feedback. They say, okay. The computer is immediately scoring it and then assigns this guidance. Explain the connections between your ideas, and they can click on that link to go back to the evidence. Sorry about that, it is fast. Watch the animation to gather the evidence, and then go back to their essay and revise their essay. So in this study, 261 students were randomly assigned to either receive basically what you just saw, the automated knowledge integration guidance, or the simulated teacher guidance. The students are in 3 7th grade teachers' classroom in one school, where about 1/3 of the kids receive a free or reduced price lunch. And the simulated teacher guidance I had mentioned briefly is designed based on an analysis of the experienced teacher's comments and why. So to do this, I found a teacher who had given guidance on this item before and then categorized their comments according to this 1 to 5 level, and that became the teacher guidance condition. The main differences between the knowledge integration approach and the simulated teacher guidance approach is particularly for the low prior knowledge students. So if a student was scored, let's say, a 0, a 1, or a 2, the teacher would either say incorrect or redo. Whereas you can see in the knowledge integration condition, there is a first point about how far along they are, and then a hint to focus them on the energy, and then a point to send them back to some evidence in the unit relevant to the ideas that they're facing. Also for the higher prior knowledge students, so let's say a student who already has one full link between 2 ideas, the guidance for the knowledge integration condition is asking them to contrast this one idea with another kind of energy transformation to help them make that distinction. And also, again, to go back to another piece of evidence. Whereas the teacher's guidance focused on one idea that was missing at the next level in the scoring. So to study the difference between the two groups, I have the embedded assessment, which means what they wrote first and what they wrote after receiving the guidance within the unit. A pre-test that's taken before the unit, and then a post-test that's taken about 1 week after, which has a couple different essay questions on it. And then the computer log files, which we can score to see if students actually went back to revisit the evidence as prompted and how that influences learning. And then I sorted students into low and high prior knowledge based on their initial score on their essay. Yeah?
Sorry, another question. Can you say anything about the pre-test and post-test? Are they the same, or are they different characterizations of the same idea? They're actually identical?
Yeah, so they're identical
They're
tests.
okay.
Yes, and here's the 2 questions here. They're both writing questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's it. That's the
Yeah.
pre-test and post-test.
And like I said, most students got to the green group question about day 5 of took them about 7 days, and the post-test was taken 1 week later. So there's about a 7 to 10 day gap between them. So students in both groups make significant pre-test and post-test gains with no overall conditions on the post-test. So both conditions worked. But when you look more closely at the low and high prior knowledge student analysis, you can see that they, on the embedded item, there was no difference. But by this post-test, about a week later, it's a different story. The knowledge integration guidance helped the students to build a significantly more robust and enduring understanding. So you can see here, whereas the high prior knowledge students made about equal gains in the 2 conditions. So the next thing I wanted to look at was how actually revising their essays influenced learning. So you can see I examined these. So this is just an excerpt from the log files where you can look at exactly how the student goes through the unit. So you can see here, this means they're actually writing their essay, and then they go back to this step 2.3, which is one of the visualizations in the unit, and then return to their essay while they're revising. So if a student did that, I score them 1. If not, they get a 0. And then investigate how those who revisit relates to their performance on the pre-post test. And here what we can see is that those who did revisit were only in the knowledge integration condition, which makes sense because it was the biggest difference between that guidance approach and the simulated teacher approach. And those who did revisit make significantly greater gains. And an interesting point is that those who did revisit were also all but one were high prior knowledge students. So it appears that the knowledge integration was significantly more effective for low prior knowledge students, as we saw in the earlier slide, and for the high prior knowledge students who follow the prompt to revisit, those who don't perform about equal across the 2 groups. The next thing that was, as I was coding these initial and revised essays, it became apparent that there's really qualitatively 2 different types of ways that the students are revising their essays based on the guidance. So you can see that in the first example, the student said the reason they have plants on the roof is because the plants get energy from the sun, so they have less energy to use in their house. They receive the automated guidance and then rewrite their essay to say, the energy from the sun taken from the plants is transformed into chemical energy, which gives the house energy. So you can see that they're trying to integrate some new ideas into what they wrote initially. It's not quite right, but they're trying to reconcile what they said first with this new information. Whereas we have a lot of other students who would do something more like this. You can see they write this whole essay, the energy from the roof on the house, energy from the light will only stay with the plant and will not transfer for your house's energy, and it will not reduce energy cost. They receive the automated guidance and write an entirely new response. So the light energy is absorbed by the plant, it's turned into chemical energy, and used by the plants to make glucose and produce oxygen. So although the second one is a more scientifically accurate view, from the knowledge integration perspective, this student, we would hypothesize, could do better because they've engaged in this process of trying to distinguish among their ideas and integrate the new piece of information. So I created a rubric to score students' revisions along this dimension. So a 0 if they did nothing, a 1 if they integrated a detail or an idea with what they wrote initially, or they could have paraphrased what they wrote initially. And then a 2 if they added something new, but it didn't link to what they said initially. So this might look like a new sentence at the end of what they wrote first, or like I said, a wholesale change of what they wrote previously. I then looked at how these types of revisions related to their performance on their initial to revised essay and on the pre and post test. And so what you can see is that when they revise their essays in the unit, that's the embedded year, the students who add a new idea do significantly better. So they write a significantly more coherent essay in their revision. But about a week later, by the time they get to the post test, this strategy of trying to integrate ideas set in motion a more successful approach throughout the rest of the unit. And that those students who took that approach performed significantly better on this post test. So the conclusions from this first classroom study are that the automated knowledge integration guidance was more effective than the simulated teacher guidance, and it can free the teacher to work with students who need help. Integrating ideas when revising essays rather than just adding ideas set in motion a successful learning for the rest of the unit. And revisiting evidence from a new perspective strengthened understanding, consistent with the knowledge integration perspective that they need to go back to help them distinguish ideas. Yeah.
So for the low knowledge students who aren't necessarily going back,
Yeah.
right? So they're staying put. Do you think that they're benefiting from this because now a teacher is coming over to them? And so,
I think the low prior knowledge students benefit from the knowledge integration guidance because it gives them a hint. And that it's a hint that connects to what they already said. Whereas in the other condition, it says redo it, and I think they need more help.
So how do we know that teachers are going? And so one of your points is that it frees up the teacher.
Yeah, well, I'm there in the classroom. So I observed and know, I mean, the teacher, the next study is actually about the teacher's role in the classroom, so we'll look at that. But the idea is, from my perspective, is that if the knowledge integration guidance automated works as well as what a teacher could give, this means the teacher doesn't need to spend the time to evaluate all of those responses, but instead could spend the time to work with students who are low scorers and need help, can circle the class, and that's what the next study is going to be about.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah?
So I'm trying to remember the contrast between the knowledge integration and the simulated teacher feedback, but it seems like there are a few things going on there, like it's that nice thinking for the knowledge integration, and presumably that's not coming from the simulated teacher ever. So I'm wondering if some of that is not so much the specificity of feedback for the integrative elements, but like a motivational aspect, like how high would they have to get like the nice thinking accolade?
You know, each one in the knowledge integration tries to give some acknowledgement of the progress, so either it's good start and they're positive, except for the first level.
So how do you know it's not the positive feedback?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So there's several differences, yeah, between the two conditions. And further studies I've got to break apart exactly which features are the most impactful. At this point, the one feature I think I have the most evidence for is the revisiting, that hint that tells them to go back. Because that one I can actually see that the students who did follow that prompt are the ones who did significantly better. But for those other features, I need to tease them out. Yeah. Yeah.
Could you say a little bit about the connection between the scoring rubric for the prompt and the feedback? Like, I'm just a little curious how that rubric was built. And
yeah, I think I actually have let's see if I can do this and not lose it. I have a slide actually that will show you that. So the okay, anyway, well, here's a little bit of it. So here's the scoring rubric that's used to analyze all of the responses. So you can see there's these key links that are identified for a student response along the lines of transfer, transformation, storage, energy use, some details about how the different ways they can save. Two humans score all of the 1,000 or so responses using this 5-point rubric. Then the computer builds a model of what all those different ways it would look like. And then once we have that scoring model, we write guidance within the WISE environment to be assigned based on each score level. And so each one is designed to move the student up one level.
right.
Yeah.
Does the computer know about those like 5 ideas that you're trying to link, or does it just, is it looking for keywords that it's seen a bunch? Or?
Yeah, it's a good point. So, I mean, it doesn't know necessarily about it. It's all based on the human scoring. So in a way it does, because the humans scored it for those links. So it's looking at not just keywords, but the ordering of the words. Basically, it's like, I envision it as, let's say you have 1,000 response, the 300 different ways a student could say a level 2 response is what it's operating off of.
Yeah, I guess more what I'm asking is like whoever programmed C-Rater to look at it, did they know about the KI rubric, or all they were going off of was
no, we send them a data set, and we
yeah.
say, we send them a data set, an Excel file that has the 1,500 scored responses, and then they divide it up into a test sections. So they'll build the model, and then they'll see how accurate, then they'll test some of those and see how accurately the computer score lines up with the human scores. And only if it reaches a cap of 0.75, it's kind of the standard for if it can actually be used within the unit. Okay, so just like Lauren was asking, actually, now that we've figured out that the automated knowledge integration guidance works, the next question is how to integrate it into the classroom with the teacher guidance. Knowing that the teacher has limited time, in this study, so wanted to give the students, they either would get 2 rounds of automated knowledge integration guidance, or if you, 1 round of automated knowledge integration guidance, and then if you scored below a 3 or below, so before you're making a full link, it would prompt you to talk to your teacher. So a little bit of what this looks like. So in the authoring system, you can imagine before this is when you'd author the guidance. This is kind of what you're, I think, asking about how it looks. So you write your score and then the guidance that goes with it. And then we work with the technology team so that you can have multiple rounds and you can have different guidance for each round. So for instance, for the teacher guidance condition in this study, everybody receives the same automated knowledge integration in the first round, but then the second round, if the students on their revision still scores a 0 to a 3, it gave them this prompt. Talk to your teacher to help you take your answer further. Put this sticky on top of your computer so your teacher knows to come to you. This is kind of a beta testing before we have the real interface, but the sticky was intended so that the students could still move on, even though it had told them to ask their teacher for help. So they're not just waiting there. So you can see in a classroom, for instance, like this girl had gotten below a 3 on her revision, so it told her to put the sticky, so she puts the sticky, and then continue working while you can see the teachers busy helping someone else, and then the teacher would come back over to help when they were available. Or likewise in this classroom, this kid has a sticky, he too. So she's working her way around to help the different students with the sticky notes. So in this study, I have the 3 7th grade teachers from one school. It's the same green roof question that you looked at earlier. And there's 286 students who are randomly assigned to either get the 2 rounds of the automated knowledge integration guidance, or 1 round of the automated knowledge integration guidance, and then this teacher intervention if they scored a 3 or below. And both groups were told that they could ask the teacher, encouraged to ask the teacher for help at any time. So the data for this one, I have more qualitative data to help understand the teacher's guidance approach relative to the automated. So you can see I have interviews with the teacher before and after the study. I audio recorded the conversations that the teacher had with the students who were low performing, and then the observations and the students' reports about the guidance. And importantly, the intervention happened primarily with only low scores. So those are the 2 groups, the groups that I'm comparing. So initially, in talking to the teacher, there was the teacher was concerned about classroom management issues and how that makes it hard to have discussions with the students about the science in a regular class. So they would say things like, I have always been poor at eliciting children's thinking because there's always someone distracting me in the room. You've got to get back to the corner where the troublesome kids are. The kids are going to play with the sticky. It'll be really hard to get to all the kids. Or they just ask us logistical stuff. The teachers were skeptical about this experiment, but they were very eager to try because they wanted to talk to the kids more about the science. And their comments were very true. As you can see in the condition where they weren't prompted to talk to the teacher, about half, 55% of the kids were scored a 3 or below on their revision. But only 2 of those kids actually called the teacher over ever to ask for help. And the teacher commented, yeah, they're just used to flying by, not doing, blowing off what they don't want to do. And in the teacher guidance condition, you know, the kids used the stickies, and the teacher kind of got into a rhythm of their approach as I analyzed these different transcripts I noticed, in how they talked to the students. So the teacher would begin by asking them to clarify what the question asked, and so the kid would reread the question. Often that could solve the problem right there. Then the teacher would ask, okay, so what did you write? So in this case, the student writes how heat energy goes into the ground, but if the plants are on your house, they'll go into the plants, making you not have to use your heater. So then the teacher would start and break down kind of the photosynthesis process step by step, starting with where the energy is coming from. And then often the teacher would do this thing where once the kid, helping them relate it to their own experience. So when the student gets to this point about it moves to the bottom and turns into heat energy, the teacher comments, so it feels hot when you grab a plant. And the kid laughed and said no, and then moved into a more normative view about it. And this was quite common, seeing the teacher do this contrast with their everyday experiences. It was also common that the students many times were hesitant to engage in the conversation, so there was a lot of just filling in blanks by the teacher because the students would kind of nod their head and just try to get the right answer, even in the conversation with the teacher. But you can see that the teachers enjoyed this. So there was a shift from this focus on kind of the managerial challenges of getting through the unit to an eagerness about and a reflection on how to help all the students really understand the science. Especially as the teacher realized that students often need help even though they weren't asking for it. And it was often different kids than they had hypothesized would need the help that did. So you can say the teacher was eager to have more questions like this in the unit, to have these kind of conversations begun. This comment that the kids with the stickies are not always the ones I would have thought need help. I didn't know which kids need help in the other group. And I had a hard time knowing what feedback to give them without giving them the answer. And this comment came up a lot every time we keep talking about it. So when we turn to the learning, it looks like in both conditions, the students make significant gains from the pre-test to the post-test, showing that that both guidance approaches worked. And there was, between conditions, low scores in both groups made equal gains with no differences. So the 2 rounds of the automated knowledge integration guidance was as effective as the teacher intervention was for these low scores. So the next question I had was, well, are there certain strategies that were more successful that the teacher used with some students or that the automated used with some students than others for learning? So again, I did this revision coding of how students revise their essays after either receiving that teacher intervention, so I only looked at that second round, or after they got the second round of the automated guidance. And again, you can see that for students who tried to integrate a new idea, whether it was accurate or inaccurate, did significantly better on this post-test a week later than students who added a new idea onto their essay when revising. And there was an equal percentage of students in the 2 conditions that took this integration approach, which is likely why we see the same gains on the test overall. So the conclusions from study 2 are that 2 rounds of the automated knowledge integration guidance can be as effective as the teacher intervention for low scores, which could free the teacher to be walking around the classroom and helping anybody who they think needs help or who they can just engage in conversations with. The automated indicator, that having them put the sticky on it, shifted the teacher's role from one of a managerial role to working more with the students on the science. And thirdly, the students who integrated ideas were more successful than those who added ideas when revising their writing in science. So overall, between the 2 studies, we can conclude that the automated knowledge integration guidance is effective, it works. And it's based on analyzing, it's not surprising really, given it's based on analyzing over 1,000 responses, which, as I said earlier, would take a teacher at least 3 years of teaching that same unit to have the time to analyze that many different responses. It was especially effective for the low prior knowledge students and for the high prior knowledge students who followed that prompt to revisit. It also supported the teacher to talk about the science with students. And thirdly, the students who integrate rather than add ideas when revising their writing, we're set on a course towards further success in the unit. So this leaves us with some design implications. So overall, how can we refine the automated guidance to improve students' use of integration strategies? How to help teachers improve their own guidance, to take advantage of all these different responses that we have. We could incorporate hints into the tools for the teachers. And then that we need to be able to customize that indicator for different contexts. So maybe the threshold is too high at 3 or too low for different settings. There should be more, we can have more questions. And that's it. So I just want to say thank you to the team and the Bay Area teachers, and if you have any questions. Yeah.
Just to follow up on your design implications, could you talk a little bit more about what you might have seen in the discussions with teachers and students that might have helped students more so? Rather than simply like, as in, you could maybe explain more about the integrating of ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think the teachers, it's a tough thing to get, because the kids are in such a mode of just trying to get the right answer. I think actually asking the kid to clarify the question they're asking, they're answering, helped a lot of kids, because they, just rereading it out loud helped a lot. They're like, oh, I guess I was thinking about something else. I think that's the first good step. A second good step I saw was this contrasting with their everyday experiences. So this other idea that heat energy is coming into the plants. The teacher would ask them something like, well, do you think the atmosphere is hot? And they'd say no, and then they'd get back to this idea about light energy. He also used but I was talking about some of the personal everyday experiences can lead them also down a harder track. So there were some examples like, well, where do you get your energy? And they talk about food, and then he tried to get them to weave back to the fact that plants were transforming light to chemical energy, which is stored in food. Sometimes they wouldn't get there. And in some cases, he would have them go back to the animation, and that seemed to work because then they could walk through it together to see the evidence and sort through the ideas. I think one challenge is that there was a goal to get them to get the entire right answer on that, within that conversation that the student was having with the teacher. I think it may be more successful looking at that integrating ideas results to have them revisit the evidence or prompt them with one question about their everyday experience and then leave them to grapple with it. Yeah.
So I'm interested in this feedback that teachers are giving with eliciting everyday experiences. And my question is basically whether you incorporate such feedback in WISE as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Well, I think it'd be a great idea to figure out how we could incorporate hints to the teacher. So, for instance, we could have it on the teacher's portal that for students who score at this level, kind of a sequence of hints for the teacher of what to ask. So, like, here's a good analogy to ask the student.
I'm surprising because you have this. I mean, maybe I didn't understand it correctly, but at first you were comparing a teacher's response, right, an automated teacher response,
yeah,
and wiser,
right,
and then somehow the transcripts you have, it seems like the teacher's response in real life are quite different.
Yeah,
like the way that they.
Right, that's a really great point. Yeah, I know. So I guess two things. One is when the simulated teacher guidance is what the teachers were actually writing to students in response to their work in the unit, and which is quite different than what a teacher would say. And the teacher, I think what they're writing is kind of the common alternative, which is why I wanted to use that as the first comparison. But I agree that these conversations that then you could see the teacher engage in were much richer than what a computer could do. So I think figuring out still how to make those conversations happen more often and for more students and in a more with a more of a focus on integration is the next step. This was kind of a first attempt at figuring out how to do that. Yeah.
I'm just curious about, I mean, how important is it that the teacher have a deep understanding of photosynthesis in order to ask a question? I mean, at some point I thought maybe the teacher's questions belied a sort of superficial understanding of the problem itself. And I wonder how that, what happens. I mean, how we help teachers, I guess, you know, to have an understanding that allows them to think about what kind of questions would build on the understanding of students. And I mean, the knowledge integration guidance does seem advantageous because we've analyzed 1,000 responses. And I guess the question is whether if the teachers analyzed 1,000 responses, whether they would, you know, what would happen and how that would help or not help. Or whether there's a way to, I don't know, build a better model of what the students are likely to be thinking so that you can ask a question that ultimately moves the student along. I mean, people have some ideas or have done some work themselves. I'm just curious as to ways that we can foster that kind of thinking.
I would just point out that in my world, it's not just whether the teacher understands the problem well enough to do that analysis. It's how many minutes the teacher gets per student assignment to read it.
Sure. Oh, kids in the class.
Yeah. So you know, and it's. I mean, I'm confident that I've mastered the material that I teach in my course, but I don't know if I have long enough to really understand. Okay, what was the student thinking when they wrote? Well, in my case, this piece of code, and how can I use that to frame my suggestion for how they could have done better? So I'm willing to give the teachers the benefit of the doubt and say that even if they understand it, part of the benefit here is they have limited time. And it seems like there are some interesting points in the design space here where KI is just strictly better. I don't know if that's blasphemy in this group.
I mean, no, in some ways, I mean, the KI guidance, I should say, when we first wrote it, is from, you know, there's certain teachers who have taught these same units over and over, and they have crafted these really excellent ways of guiding students. So in some of the other units, the knowledge integration guidance is really modeled after taking what they were doing and just putting it in this more structured space. But I agree with the time issue. Yeah.
So in the structured teacher interaction, it came back with basically, could you clarify?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, what triggers that? Or every time you get a response, the simulated teacher would say, could you clarify? What's the script that determines what the simulated teacher gives?
Let me go back to this. Do you mean in this one?
No, the very first.
Okay.
But one I asked about earlier.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Here.
The next one says.
This one?
Yeah, and the next one, add detail.
Right.
So, like, what triggers the add detail comment from the simulated teacher? Anything, or?
Yeah. So okay. Ideally, the way I could have done this study is I would have had the teacher write the guidance themselves for every response. But given these kind of limitations we just talked about, the teacher didn't have time to do that because they teach multiple WISE units during the year. And so I had to figure out a way to test it against kind of the common teacher guidance they would give without having the teacher do it. Okay, so to do that, what I did is looked at the guidance the teacher gave to the question in previous years, categorized those responses in a level 1 to 5, and then grouped the comments the teacher was giving to each of those kinds of responses. So this teacher, when they would typically get a response that we would score a 4, they would say something like, add detail where to plants store energy. Does that make sense? So it's a prototypical design.
I see.
Yeah. It's somewhere hopefully close to the mean, but definitely not illustrative of what every teacher would do.
But missing detail wasn't the only reason that someone would get a 4 as opposed to a 5, or was that always the reason?
Well, a 4, on the knowledge integration rubric is what, so all the responses are scored according to that 5-point scoring rubric, and a 4 would mean that they had one full link between 2 accurate ideas. So really they're missing 1 or 2 more links among ideas. Yeah.
Can you speak a bit more to the actual, maybe the students' framing of the question? You talked about that would help some students actually improve as the unit progressed. Did you see that at all in any of the discussions with the teachers, that some of them were very much framing this as a sense-making activity with the teacher, or was it more a case of, I was just got this sticky, so I'm just, I don't know why you're here, but I have this sticky, so talk to me.
Yeah, I'd say it's the latter. I mean, most of them put the sticky up, and the teacher comes over and how can I help you? And they say, well, I was told to put the sticky on the computer, and we have to talk. So I can say the teacher, really enjoyed this experience, and you could see it as he got more involved in it. You could see how he was kind of coming up with a pattern of the kinds of questions he would use. It took like over 3 days of him doing this to get through all the kids that were there. The students, on the other hand, I think were a little taken aback and not sure how to engage in this kind of conversation with the teacher. So they would often kind of, be silent, and he'd have to ask, these questions, and they'd answer with a one word, and then he'd have to ask another question and kind of pull out as much as he could from them.
But was that interpreted by students that if they had a sticky on their computer that they'd done something wrong?
That's a good question. You mean, did they know they scored low? I think they knew when he came over that they had their response, because they'd often say something like, say, well, so what's the problem? Like, I don't know how to do this, or reread the question. So what'd you write? Well, I just don't get it. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just wondering, it's not related to that.
Yeah.
Once the sticky stuff becomes part of the system, it's no longer sticky.
Right.
It's
right. Better.
in technology. To what extent do you think that the teachers will change their practices based on that, versus like, it was a study and you're in the classroom and sort of like, kind of monitoring what's going on, and they feel encouraged to do this type of thing, and what's the extent will it change them when you're not around?
Yeah. I don't know. I have to say, among the 3 teachers, as you saw in that pre-interview, like they just seem fed up with the fact that kids aren't talking to them about science, and that's why they're there. They want to talk about it, and, so there's that kind of, I think, that eagerness to have these conversations, as well as kind of the realities of not having the energy to be able to identify who needs help, and this was a way to take that job off of them. One of them said to me, she has a 5-month-old baby, I'm in the middle of sleep training, and I'm just exhausted. This is great, because now I don't need to read all their responses. So it's kind of like a way to, a more efficient approach. So I don't know. I think it'll vary. Yeah.
Do you think over time they'll become better at getting? What I found, which I saw in your work, was that a lot of the kids are just fishing for the right answer from the teacher.
Yeah.
So, their goal in this interaction is not to answer the question, but to get the teacher to tell them the answer to the question. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like, even in the later examples you gave, that the teacher became more adept at handling that situation and pushing it back to the student. So I just wonder, what would you do for professional development to help teachers become more adept at, eliciting ideas? Because, it is true that students are very good at trying to get the teacher to tell them the right answer. What's more simple than, getting the teacher to tell you the right answer rather than figuring it out for yourself? And here's the teacher right handy to do just that. But ultimately, some of your teachers, it sounds like, are excited to hear what the students have to say.
Yeah.
And I guess they just would like to figure out how to get ideas out of the other students. And so I'm just wondering if, what
I
would
think
be
the transcripts would actually be really, maybe a productive experience for us to simplify them down. I don't know, maybe people have thoughts about this, and have the teachers look at some of the questions that were asked in these interactions and how the students responded, and then, kind of identify which questions were most successful with the teachers.
Any other questions? I promised that we'd end at 5, because I
Yeah.
think really that is when we're supposed to end. And I want to thank everybody. This was really stimulating, and I'd love your comments and questions.